There is a second, almost invisible, in which a person stops fighting their own pain and decides, without realizing it, to flee from it. No one hears this second happen. There is no alarm, no warning, no voice saying, "From now on, something in you will change forever." And yet, it is precisely in this silent instant that behaviors are born that will later seem inevitable, as if they were a desperate escape in the midst of the chaos of existence itself. Carl Jung spent his entire life studying this kind of instant. For him, nothing in the human soul arises from absolute emptiness. Every escape is a response to something that has been hurting for a long time, even if that pain does not yet have a name. At first, almost nothing is noticed. A small relief after a difficult day, a distraction that calms for a few minutes, a feeling of comfort that seems harmless. But time has a silent force. What began as a temporary solution gradually transforms into a habit, and the habit, without being noticed, hardens in a cycle. The search for fleeting relief, for a brief feeling of peace, slowly transforms into a routine that corrodes from within. And when we finally realize what has happened, we are already trapped in a pattern that seems bigger than our own will. What in fact lies behind this cycle? What drives a human being to repeatedly do what they know is harmful to them? This question is unsettling because it touches on something we prefer not to confront. Jung would say that the answer lies not in weakness of character, but in an older wound, almost always preceding the conscious understanding of the problem. Every addictive behavior, however destructive it may seem, is the expression of something that went unanswered at some point in life. It's not just about seeking pleasure or immediate escape. It's about trying to reconnect with something that was lost, even if this attempt, seen from the outside, seems like pure destruction. Hidden beneath the surface of every addiction is a concealed search for meaning. A desperate attempt to heal a pain that escapes the control of the conscious mind. It's as if, deep within the psyche, an ancient voice exists trying to say something the person doesn't yet know how to hear. Jung would call this the message of the shadow. Everything we repress doesn't disappear. It merely disguises itself and returns later, knocking on the door of consciousness in the form of impulse, compulsion, repetition. The question that remains, and which you may have asked yourself at some point, is simple and disturbing at the same time. Why do some people seem to sink irreversibly into their own addictions, while others, almost mysteriously, manage to escape the same trap? This question doesn't have an easy answer, and perhaps never has. But it invites us to look at addiction in a different way than usual. Instead of treating it merely as a moral problem or as a simple lack of willpower, we can treat it as an enigma of the human soul, a symptom of something that needs to be deciphered, not just fought. Judging those who suffer from this type of pattern is easy and quick. Understanding what really happens inside that person requires more time, more patience, and a willingness to look beyond the visible behavior to the invisible root that sustains it. That is exactly the path we will follow now. Understanding addiction through the eyes of Carl Jung, one of the thinkers who most deeply explored the study of the human psyche and its hidden parts, and expanding this understanding with the experience of a doctor who spent decades listening closely to the pain of thousands of people trapped in this same cycle. The author, Gabor Maté. Before continuing, it's worth pausing for a moment and feeling the true weight of this issue. Think of someone you know, or perhaps yourself, repeating a behavior that you know is harmful but seems impossible to abandon. Now think, What is this person really trying to resolve? This isn't a rhetorical question. It's the kind of question Jung would ask, looking not at the behavior itself, but at what it's trying to communicate. Because for him, every symptom carries a message. And addiction, perhaps more than any other symptom, carries an urgent message about something that has been silenced for too long. What we are about to explore is not the story of a personal weakness, nor a judgment on those who fall into this type of behavior. It is the portrait of a soul searching for itself, trying, in whatever way it can, to find a way back to something it lost at some point in life. And this path, however strange it may seem, begins precisely in the place that most people avoid looking, the interior of themselves, where the true origin of this whole story resides. It's 2 in the morning and the room is dark, but someone's face is still illuminated by their cell phone screen. The person knows they need to sleep. They know they'll regret it tomorrow. And yet, their finger continues to slide across the screen, scrolling from one screen to another, searching for something they can't quite explain. It's not the first time this has happened, and it probably won't be the last. Scenes like this repeat themselves every day, in millions of homes with millions of different people. Someone opening a bottle after a hard day, someone making one last bet promising it's the last, someone binge eating after an argument. These are common situations, almost invisible within the routine, but they hide something much deeper than they seem at first glance. Carl Jung would never reduce these moments to a simple lack of discipline. For him, addiction was never a character flaw, but rather a symptom, the language the psyche uses when it finds no other way to express itself. When words fail, when consciousness cannot name what hurts, the body and behavior take over the speech. That's why the person who scrolls through their phone at 2 in the morning, or who opens a bottle after a bad day, isn't just seeking pleasure. They are, unknowingly, trying to say something to themselves, something they haven't yet found words to express in any other way. Jung viewed the psyche as a totality, a vast territory where the conscious and unconscious live in constant tension, like two currents of the same river that sometimes collide. When a person cannot confront what stirs in the depths of themselves, the unconscious finds another path. Repetitive behavior, compulsion, the insistent search for relief. Each relapse, each return to the same pattern is a blind but persistent attempt to fill a void that may stem from a lack of meaning in life, emotional disconnection from those around them, or parts of their own personality that have never been recognized or accepted. They are, in a way, pieces of ourselves that were left behind and are now knocking at the door asking for space. Here's the first great mystery of this story. The more someone tries to push these parts away, ignoring them, the stronger the impulse becomes to repeat the behavior that promises to alleviate the pain. It's as if the mind tries to protect itself from something, but in doing so, ends up feeding exactly what it wanted to avoid. There's also another side to this same issue: addiction as an escape from reality itself. Faced with stress, anguish, or a moment of crisis, it's common to seek refuge in anything that silences, even if only for a few minutes, the internal noise of existence. Think of someone who lost their job and starts drinking every night, or someone who, after a difficult breakup, immerses themselves endlessly in games or online shopping. In all these cases, the escape seems to work, at least at the beginning. But here's the unexpected twist. This escape is never permanent, and the return to reality, when it finally happens, usually hurts even more than the original pain. It's like closing your eyes to avoid seeing an approaching storm. The storm doesn't disappear, It just approaches silently while the person keeps their eyes closed. And so a dangerous cycle closes. Addiction doesn't solve the suffering. It only postpones it, disguises it, multiplies it silently until the moment when it can no longer be ignored. Consider also the scene of someone sitting at the dinner table, surrounded by their family, but with a lost, distant look, as if they were somewhere else. On the outside, everything seems normal. The conversation continues. The dishes circulate. No one notices anything wrong. Inside, however, this person is waging a silent battle against an impulse that insists on returning as soon as they are alone again. Jung would say that this scene reveals something essential about human nature. We can carry an entire storm inside us without anyone around noticing a single sign of it. And it is precisely this invisibility that makes addiction so dangerous. It grows protected by silence, fueled by the shame of admitting that something is out of control. What makes this story even more intriguing is that it doesn't only apply to those already labeled as addicts. It somehow applies to anyone who has ever used distraction to avoid feeling something difficult, even if only for a few minutes. The difference between a passing behavior and a pattern that imprisons can be more subtle than one might imagine. And that's precisely why this story deserves to be told carefully. Because just when we think we understand the problem, a doctor who has spent his life listening to people trapped in this same cycle will reveal something that completely changes the way we see this hunger that seems never to be satisfied. There is an ancient image born from Eastern spiritual traditions that describes with disturbing precision what the physician Gabor Maté repeatedly encountered in his office: the hungry ghost, a creature with an enormous belly and a throat as narrow as a hair, condemned to eat forever without ever feeling satiated. It was precisely this symbol that Maté chose to name his best-known book, The Kingdom of Hungry Ghosts, because he saw year after year, person after person, the same pattern repeating itself. An appetite that devours everything in its path, and yet remains empty inside. Maté wrote something that summarizes this phenomenon directly. False needs, no matter how many times they are satisfied, fail to bring real satisfaction. The brain never manages, so to speak, to feel that it has had enough, to relax and move on to other important things in life. It's like leaving a full banquet and minutes later feeling hungry again. A hunger that doesn't come from the stomach, but from an older and deeper place within the person. This hunger, in Jung's interpretation, doesn't ask for food, drugs, or a cell phone screen. It asks for recognition of something that has been forgotten within the psyche itself. But what exactly is this hunger trying to communicate? That's the question that separates those who observe addiction from the outside, with easy judgment, from those who truly try to understand it from within. And this is where Maté's definition becomes essential. Addiction is any repeated behavior, linked or not to substances, in which the person feels compelled to continue, even in the face of evident harm to themselves and others. Note that this definition doesn't specifically mention drugs. It speaks of repeated behavior and a feeling of internal obligation, which completely changes the scope of this conversation. This means that the shadow described by Jung can disguise itself in many different ways, some so common that almost no one recognizes them as dangerous. Compulsive use of social media, pornography, video games, gambling, uncontrolled sex, impulsive shopping, and even extreme exercise or work used as a constant escape from one's personal life. Any passion, however noble it may seem at first, carries within it the potential to become a prison if the person loses control over it. This is one of the most uncomfortable discoveries of this journey. Addiction doesn't always wear an obvious mask. So, how do you tell the difference between a healthy passion and an addiction disguised as a hobby, discipline, or even productivity? Maté's answer is straightforward and works as a test that anyone can apply to themselves silently without needing a therapist or formal diagnosis. The central question is, who is in control, the person or the behavior? It's possible to control a passion, but when passion begins to control the person, there is no longer free choice. There is automatic, almost mechanical repetition, disguised as a personal decision. There is a second, even more unsettling question that Maté suggests asking when doubt persists. Given the real harm this behavior is causing, both to the person themselves and to those around them, would they be willing to stop right now, without hesitation? If the honest answer is no, that is the clearest sign that the shadow has taken control. And if, in addition, the person has already tried to stop before, promised themselves that this would be the last time, and yet returned to the same pattern, then the behavior has ceased to be a choice and has become a repeated destiny. The most disturbing aspect of this discovery is realizing that this same question can be applied to behaviors that society normally praises. A person extremely dedicated to their work might be seen as an example of discipline, when in reality they are running away from something at home that they prefer not to face. Someone obsessed with maintaining the perfect body might receive constant praise, while using exercise as a way to silence an old emotional pain. The shadow described by Jung doesn't only choose socially condemned forms of escape, it also hides within what everyone applauds. Given this, a new question arises, perhaps the most important one so far. If addiction can stem from any object, any substance, any behavior, then the problem was never really in the chosen object. The problem was always somewhere else, older, more hidden, waiting to be discovered. And it is precisely at this point that the story takes a decisive turn, because the true origin of this hunger, according to Maté and according to Jung himself, dates back to a period of life when no one imagines looking for answers. The first years of existence, when the brain is still being formed, and each experience leaves marks that can last forever. There are engineers, even today, working in closed rooms to design machines capable of capturing human attention with almost surgical precision. Researcher Natasha Dow-Schüll spent years closely studying the creators of slot machines in Las Vegas and discovered something disturbing. These machines are not just made to entertain. They are designed millimeter by millimeter, sound by sound, light by light, to lead the person to a state that the players themselves describe as the zone, a moment when time disappears, money ceases to matter, and only the repetition of the act of gambling itself remains. This means that the shadow described by Jung does not act alone. It finds external partners, objects created precisely to exploit the wound that already existed before any machine was turned on. But if the object alone doesn't explain everything, then the inevitable question is, where exactly does this vulnerability originate? The most surprising answer came from an experiment that challenged decades of beliefs about addiction. For a long time, it was believed that certain substances, such as heroin, created automatic dependence in any brain exposed to them repeatedly. Researcher Bruce Alexander decided to test this idea in a different way. Instead of placing rats alone in empty cages with only 2 bottles of water, one pure and the other mixed with drugs, as traditional experiments did, he built a completely different environment, full of stimuli, toys, space to run, and other rats to interact with. The results surprised the scientific community. The rats living in this rich environment practically ignored the drug-laced water, while the rats isolated in empty cages drank repeatedly until they died. The addiction, in this case, did not originate from the substance. It originated from isolation. This result echoes exactly what Jung intuited decades earlier without any laboratory. Addiction is not just a chemical reaction. It is a response to an environment that failed to offer connection, meaning, and belonging. And it is precisely here that the human story deepens even further, because, unlike rats, human beings carry a vulnerability that begins long before any conscious choice is possible: childhood itself. Jung wrote in a phrase that seems to transcend time without losing its force, that all the difficulties experienced by parents leave inevitable marks on the child's psyche, sometimes with pathological results that only appear decades later. There is a little known but revealing fact about this process. In the first years of life, the human brain grows and organizes itself at a rate that is never repeated throughout life. It is a period in which every gesture of care or every absence thereof is deeply registered, long before any conscious memory of what happened exists. A child who grows up in an environment marked by abuse, neglect, or constant instability literally has the development of entire brain areas altered. The systems responsible for pleasure, impulse control, and stress response are formed differently, more vulnerable, more prone to seeking external relief later in adulthood. Gabor Maté witnessed this story repeatedly in his career, but one case in particular illustrates with brutal clarity what is at stake. A 47-year-old man addicted to drugs since adolescence was questioned by Maté about why he continued using, even after so many years of painful consequences. The man's answer was short, almost disarming in its sincerity. He said he didn't know for sure, that he was just trying to fill a void in his life, something between boredom and complete lack of direction. There was no guilt in this answer, nor an easy excuse. There was only the naked confession of someone carrying, from a very young age, an unnamed pain. Just as a baby in the womb depends entirely on its mother's body for survival, a young child remains for years emotionally and psychologically fused with the adults who care for them, without any real separation between what they feel and what they absorb from their surrounding environment. This explains why a childhood marked by instability, even without any isolated dramatic episode, can silently mold an entire brain toward a constant search for external relief, decades before any substance enters the scene. Perhaps the most surprising thing is realizing that this man wasn't describing a problem unique to him. He was unknowingly describing a pattern present in thousands of similar stories, all born from the same kind of origin. A childhood where something essential was missing, even when, to the outside world, everything seemed to be in order. And it is precisely this detail, the fact that the wound can exist even without visible signs of abuse or tragedy, that will reveal the next layer of this investigation. A layer even more subtle and, therefore, even more dangerous than any evident trauma. Imagine a perfect house, seen from the outside. The car in the garage, the bills paid, dinner served every night at the same time, the parents present in every family photo. No neighbor would suspect a thing. And yet, inside that same house, a child grows up feeling a loneliness that no one notices, because the father, who is physically there every day, carries within him an invisible weight, a silent depression, a weariness that prevents him from truly seeing the child in front of him. Psychologist Alan Shore gave this phenomenon a name: parental emotional absence, or close separation. It is the presence of the body without the presence of the soul. And it is precisely this type of wound, almost impossible to detect from the outside, that proves even more dangerous than many evident traumas, because no one names it, no one validates it, no one offers care for something that seems not to have existed. A child who feels this emotional distance instinctively tries to reconnect with the absent adult. They seek eye contact, attention, any sign that they are truly being seen. When this search goes unanswered, something silently breaks inside them. Some children develop repetitive self-soothing gestures. Others simply learn to disconnect from themselves as a way to survive a pain that has no name or visible solution. Years later, as adults, these same people will seek, without knowing exactly why, any external source capable of reproducing the comfort that never arrived in childhood. And here is the first twist in this part of the story. This vulnerability doesn't require any visible tragic event. It can be born within the most seemingly stable home in the neighborhood. But there is something even broader at stake, something that transcends the personal history of each family. More than 2,000 years ago, when the Roman Empire began to crumble from within, historians recorded a curious collective behavior. Amidst political decay and the widespread feeling that everything was falling apart, large crowds turned to excessive pleasure as a way to numb collective anguish. Banquets, excesses, constant distractions, all in an attempt to silence the same kind of existential emptiness that today appears disguised in another form. The question that remains is inevitable. Can entire societies also become addicted in the same way that an individual can? The answer seems to be yes, and the proof is right in front of anyone who carries a cell phone in their pocket these days. The compulsive consumption of news, online shopping, endless entertainment, and social networks that never stop updating. All of this functions as a modern version of that same Roman escape, now available 24 hours a day in the palm of your hand. Gabor Maté described this feeling with a phrase that's hard to forget. There's a void that runs through all of current culture, and the addict simply feels this void more intensely and painfully than most people around them, who try to fill the same hole using methods that are only slightly more socially acceptable. And it is precisely here that the most unsettling twist in this part of the story arrives. Addictions really do work, at least for a while. A man who had lived with his own addiction for years confessed something brutally honest to Gabor Maté. He used drugs not to feel pleasure, but to avoid feeling the emotions that arose when he was sober. Decades earlier, psychologist William James had already noticed something similar when observing the effects of alcohol on the human mind. For a few moments, it seemed to open a door to something akin to a genuine spiritual experience, before the poison itself took over the body and destroyed any trace of that sensation. The problem is that no shortcut is free. Each time a person resorts to the same relief, the brain demands a higher dose the next time, in a silent spiral of increasing tolerance. Little by little, without realizing the exact moment this happens, the addiction begins to occupy the center of their entire life, pushing to the edges everything that once brought true satisfaction: health, relationships, projects, the very meaning of existence. A point is reached where the person observes, from within themselves, a part of them acting alone, automatically following the impulse, while another part, still conscious, watches everything without being able to intervene, knowing exactly how much it is destroying their own potential. It is precisely in the face of this distressing and revealing scene that the most urgent question of this entire journey arises. Is there, in fact, any possible way back after going so far? There is a paradox that is difficult to accept in light of everything we have seen so far. The same brain that needs healing is precisely the brain that was wounded by the addiction itself. The deeper the addiction, the greater the biological obstacles to finding the way back. Given this, it would be easy to conclude that there is no real way out. But there is a remarkable fact, proven repeatedly, that completely changes this conclusion. The human brain continues to adapt and reorganize itself throughout life, even in old age, even after decades of the same repeated pattern. This means that no story is definitively written, not even those that seem most trapped within their own cycle. The first practical step on this journey back doesn't require superhuman strength, nor drastic decisions made overnight. It requires only one thing, simple to describe and difficult to practice: looking directly at one's own behavior, without running away, without hiding behind easy excuses. Jung called this movement awareness and insisted that without this ability to look inward, a person is condemned to repeat the same pattern indefinitely, never understanding its true origin. Recognizing addiction as an attempt to escape and not as a definitive solution is in itself an enormous act of courage, even if it seems small from the outside. From this recognition comes the second step: to reflect honestly on the life events that led to that repeated behavior. This reflection can be painful because it requires revisiting old wounds, often linked to childhood, emotional absences, and models of coexistence learned too early. But it is precisely this internal dive that allows us to identify what is really being sought behind the automatic behavior. Relief from loneliness, escape from boredom, an attempt to fill an existential void, or a defense against emotional pain that has never been fully processed. Recognizing this pattern doesn't solve everything at once, but it removes some of the automatic power that previously seemed uncontrollable. Here's something essential for anyone watching this video thinking about themselves or someone close to them. This journey never needs to be undertaken entirely alone. Jung deeply believed that human beings are, by nature, relational beings, and that much of the healing process comes precisely from reconnecting with others. Seeking support from trusted friends, family members willing to listen without judgment, specialized support groups, or mental health professionals prepared for this type of guidance is not a sign of weakness. It is, in fact, one of the most courageous and effective steps in this entire transformation process. It's also worth remembering that abandoning a deeply ingrained pattern rarely happens linearly or perfectly. There may be relapses, moments of doubt, a feeling of going in circles. This doesn't mean failure. It simply means that the brain is gradually creating new pathways to replace the old ones. A slow but real process, sustained by each small conscious choice repeated over time. Self-compassion in this journey is as important as discipline because excessive guilt tends only to fuel the same cycle you are trying to break. Gabor Maté concludes his best-known book with a phrase that carries both honesty and hope. Not all stories end perfectly happily, but the discoveries of science, the teachings of the heart, and the revelations of the soul guarantee that no human being is ever beyond the possibility of redemption. This phrase summarizes, perhaps better than any other, everything that has been built up throughout this video. Addiction is
To the
not the
eternal
final
glory
proof
of
that
this
someone
hall,
is
and
condemned.
to the night that
It is,
ne'er
above
ends.
all, an urgent
Drink up,
and
my
painful
friends.
sign that something within that person is asking for attention, care, and a different path to follow. If this content
the poison
resonated with you,
spreads.
or made you think of someone you know who is
And yet the
facing
light
this same
remains.
silent battle, there's a simple way to continue this conversation. Like this video now and write a comment sharing your thoughts on everything presented here, even if you prefer to do so anonymously. Your words might be exactly what someone else, reading silently, needed to find today. And if you want to continue this journey of self-discovery with this channel, subscribe now so you don't miss the upcoming videos that will continue exploring with the same depth the hidden paths of the human mind.